Hello everyone and welcome back to Planet Zoo. You may notice a couple of changes to our reptile centre. The walls are now all like this flat white colour, and we've capped off these edges here that were missing some pieces. It's not great, and we do have to do a little bit of work on the lip just to make sure that it all sits flush. But today we're going to be working on the exterior, and you can see there a bit more plaster work to be doing, changing that to white. I'm going to work on the external area of the building and then finish off the habitats. So we might as well just dive straight into the speed run, and then I can show you a full tour of the building after we have completed it. So one of the first things I wanted to do was tidy up this roof a little bit. I thought having that one strip of glass running all the way along the ceiling in that main area wasn't enough, and we needed to let a lot more natural light into this, especially considering we're going to be limited on the actual windows that we have on the sides of the building. It would be a better idea to have a lot more natural light coming in through the ceiling itself. I also really like the way that the game displays light, if that makes sense. Like when you've got a nice sunrise or a lovely sunset coming in, it bathes the rooms in this wonderful light, and it just really makes things stand out and adds a really nice touch to the game itself. And from going to zoos myself and going into these buildings, natural light and the way that it catches all of the exhibits and the habitats and stuff that you see, especially in internal structures, is fantastic. And like watching nature documentaries and things like that, you always see these incredible vistas captured in this wonderful, stunning sunrise or sunset, and I just think it makes the natural world stand out beautifully. So we were still lacking a little bit on the roof. I wasn't sure what to do, so I played around with these aluminium panels, looking to create this large structure of a ventilation system, if you know what I mean. It's boring as hell, but I think stuff like this really makes buildings stand out and shows that a lot of thought has been put into the design of these things. Like a building of this size, taking in that much heat from the sun and all of the habitats and machinery running, you're going to need some sort of ventilation. So I wanted to put these big aircon units on the top and kind of make some extractor fans on the internal side of things. It's really tiny detailed work that I probably shouldn't be doing now, but it was, while I have these like dips in my inspiration, sometimes the smallest things really make me think again and get back into things. So this was kind of what I did while I was thinking about how I was going to decorate the external walls of the building, because that was the main sticking point of this episode, how I was going to make that stand out and look nice at the same time. And we'll talk a little bit more about that later. But for now, what I used for these was aluminium panels, then I threw some actual smaller air conditioning units into them to make them look a little bit larger. We could always revisit this and use some painted like wagon wheels or something to make it look a little bit bigger, and then put like a natural frame on it so that it looks like one complete piece. I was fairly happy with how that looked, and it at least gave me some food for thought for how I was going to decorate the rest of this building. The next step was to start working on the exterior, because that's what this entire episode is about. I tried using these metal grids, and although I quite like how they look, I don't think they're the best thing to be sticking on the side of a building, certainly not how I was using them. I did persevere and leave them in, because I thought maybe if we just keep them, they can lightly frame whatever we put on the inside of this. So we left them in just for now, so that I could experiment with the other external structure that I was going to put in place. I did want to open up the tortoise habitat a little bit more, because it is quite small, so I thought a window on this side would be good, and we may even remove the wall entirely from the side of the crocodile habitat so that you can see across both habitats. I did notice when I removed the exterior wall on the left there that it was actually just dead space where I'd created shells for the habitats and hiding other bits and pieces that were like behind these walls, so we couldn't put a window here, so I bricked that back up again with plaster. In here, rather than have a window going straight down to the floor, I put a little bit of a plaster frame in and then tried experimenting with some glass. Just to let in a little bit more natural light, I thought about putting those opaque glass windows in on that left hand side, but it didn't work because the habitat was sticking halfway out of the door and I didn't like that. Probably another good reason for me in our next zoo building as like a complete grid formation, which is what I'm going to try doing, just to see if that helps me get a little bit more to grips with all of these tools and things like pathing issues and actual build issues, because I've noticed a lot of the time, especially early on in this build in particular, things weren't matching up quite right. And I like my buildings to be one complete structure, because in the future I do plan to like export them or whatever, or save the blueprints, and it would be nice to be able to pick them up, drop them down in another building or another zoo and play with them a little bit more, just to give them a little bit of a unique feel so that they look a little bit better. I wasn't too happy with that window, so I went back to the original glass that I'd put in with a new plan. The idea was to make all four one pattern and then just sink it into the ground a little bit so that it looked uniform and had the frame going right across the middle, and I think I got that. While I was doing this, I'd been looking at a few other videos and I saw someone use these hexagonal glass pieces in a really creative way, so I decided that's what I would do here. As it's a reptile centre, I think these create a really nice scaled effect. So it was something that I wanted to use all the way around the sides, which might be a little bit overkill, but that's something I can analyse once this build is finished. So the idea was to sink a few in, bring a few out, and create this scaled pattern that looks a little bit like reptilian skin and almost reflects that internal signage that we've got running along the sensational scales sign that really brings people in and catches the eye. I thought about changing the colours, and when I did experiment with that, I don't know if you see it a bit later on in the video, I realised it was actually the frame of the glass that was being changed and not the glass itself. We could maybe use some of the flat coloured shapes and just sink them behind a little bit, see if we can actually get a hexagonal piece, but I'm not sure if that would work or if that's actually even possible. So as you can see here, we're just creating a loose pattern here. I don't want to do overkill, that looks like too much of a honeycomb or a beehive or something. So we do change that and take a few out so that it becomes this weird loose pattern that will carry on around the entire building. Tried changing the colour of the plaster a little bit, but that wasn't looking great, so I went back to this. And as you can see now, the metal grate that we've got going on, it's looking less and less attractive. I then went back to my shipping container idea that I talked about in the last episode and thought these corrugated iron pieces, when coloured brown, would look really nice. So I started playing around with them, and suddenly everything started to make sense with the build. This was a little bit long and a little bit of an arduous process because things weren't quite snapping, so I had to manually move everything in by hand, but I felt a lot more satisfied with what I was doing here than how I'd been feeling with the other elements of the build, and I thought this would be my kicker, like the finishing touch that I needed to make this really stand out and look attractive from the outside as well as the in. It also meant that this brown and white plaster theme that I'd been going with carried on throughout the entire building, and there was nothing really standing out and looking a little bit mismatched like it doesn't fit. The next step was to just repeat this all the way around and see how it was going to go. I really liked that some of these hexagonal glass pieces stuck out a little bit and lapped and like overlapped the corrugated iron, and then it was just a case of making sure that the windows matched. I did think about sinking some down a little bit to create a little bit of a pattern and disrupt that flat colour a little bit, and that did look nice, but I thought it only worked on the windows, which we just needed to do a little bit of tidying up with. It also meant I could create an extra lip on the roof of the building just to add even more of a dimension to it. So as you can see here, we're just going around and adjusting some heights, and I do think this looks really nice, and when you see it in the final building, I was more than impressed with what we'd done, especially considering this is my first big build. I'm going to keep saying that. One of the things about Planet Zoo is you see a lot of the big YouTubers who just create stuff like off the cuff, and I think that's great. It's amazing to see these projects coming out, and the stuff that people work on is incredible. But I feel like there's not a lot for the absolute beginners who are just learning the tools and the tricks and still getting frustrated over pathing issues and things like that. So this is me. This is what I do and how I build my zoos. And I do like it and I am happy with it. I know I could be better. I know there's probably glaring errors that I'm missing in things, but I am very happy with this. And this first panel really inspired me and made me want to carry on and finish the rest of it off. So all I did here was remove a few of these glass hexagon pieces so that it didn't look too invasive on the rest of the building, and then finished off a corrugated iron frame. Now we could put some ivy and vines in these plaster gaps, and I think I may do that, but that's for another episode or some off-camera stuff when I'm doing little touch-ups to finish off a building. So then it was just the easy case of moving all of these around. You can see there actually we've got some light coming through the walls. One of the things that really puts me off about this game is if you do get your lighting placement a little bit wrong, you get weird stuff poking out under buildings and things like that. You can see some of the mist that I'd put in is coming through the back of the building as well, so we'll cover that up with some trees, you know. A happy little tree just to cover up my mistakes. And the next step was, like I said, just carrying this all the way around. I decided to leave the front of the building for now and focus on something else. And what I wanted to do was create a sign pointing to the Reptile Centre. So, sticking with the theme of steel, iron against this plaster background, rather than using wood, which I thought looked a little bit weak anyway, I went with these iron girders, or steel girders. And it was a case of building a nice little base and then expanding it out to create this lovely little frame. And on that frame we'd be using the corrugated iron again to create a big sign with a different colour this time. One of the reasons I wanted to do this was that this building is quite set out from that main entrance area of the zoo, and it would be nice to have something that highlights its location so that the visitors have a location to aim for and know that the Reptile Centre is in this direction. But also create a nice little woodland path cutting away from the main entrance area over a lake of some description maybe, and just make like a little nature walk for people who are walking, because this is a fair distance anyway, so I expect to run a train route or some sort of transportation along and have a stop nearby. Now this may actually change in the future because we've got our staff area set out there just so that it's close to these two new buildings, and that is in a little bit of a bad position at the moment, so we will need to think about changing that and rerouting some of our paths. So once this frame was completed, I just duplicated it. I'm not too happy with the colour. The other thing that I don't really like is that this still looks a little bit two-dimensional and doesn't look like it has quite as much support as I would like it to have. So I may take some inspiration from those big signs on like skyscrapers and stuff in New York and things and really make this a big sign. But for now, I'm quite happy with how it looks. We rotated it, we did change the colour a little bit, and then we started putting in our lettering. I wanted to do something a little bit different with this lettering. So we started with these 3D framed letters, which I think look really nice and really pop out, especially on bigger signs. Put in our lettering, Reptile Centre, just spacing everything out a little bit more so that it doesn't all merge into one. And then what I wanted to do was duplicate this entire set of wording in a different colour and have it all pop out so that it looks like there's a shadow created by the letters behind it. So we left this as like a green and then didn't like it, so changed it a little bit. Then after duplicating it, we made the back of it white. So there you can see it's added a little bit of framing on it. And the next thing was placing a light. At the moment, we don't have a lot of lighting options. I don't actually know if I've got more lighting options to unlock. If this is it, I'm pretty disappointed, I have to say. But we'll deal with what we've got. We used some of these New World Stadium lights. That was far too bright, so we just adjusted the colour a little bit to grey. And then we took one out because it was just far too powerful. The other issue is that some of the standard lighting is too weak and we can't actually light up this sign enough. It would be really nice if these letters had lighting, like if we could have lit up letters that glowed in a certain colour, but I was pretty happy with that. It does look a little bit janky. It could probably do with being a little bit shorter in terms of its height, but that would end up with letters squashed together. The next thing I wanted to do was just continue this artsy frame that we had. It didn't really work, so I abandoned that, but I do bring it back later on in the episode. What I thought was more important was that excuse my camera work there, just moving around a little bit. I just wanted to have a quick look at what this looked like from a distance. It wasn't great, so we adjusted the lighting a little bit more just to really try and make it pop out, but not look too garish. Next up, I did try with the mist, and it kind of looked okay. But again, the way that the mist falls, it doesn't fall in like a conal or a spherical shape. It's flat, so it assumes you've placed it on flat ground or against a flat surface, which doesn't look great because you get this mist texture that cuts off at a certain point. So I went back round to the front of the building and finished that off, and then started putting in these glass panes further along, just adding in some trims to the walls, which I think looks really nice and finishes it off. So it doesn't, what I really like is it's got a kind of wood effect, but you can still tell that it's not wood. It's this definitely corrugated iron, which looks like chopped up shipping containers, which it sticks with the theme that I'm going for. And also, by pure stroke of luck, a lot of these sort of reptile centres, or the reptiles would come off a big boat and they'd be shipped into the zoo. So that's the angle I'm going for anyway, guys. Just work with me, please. I'm trying to make it thematic, and it's kind of working. And then we did have a little bit of an issue with these window panes on this side of the building, and only this side of the building, which was really frustrating. Because of the angle, it was very difficult to get these matched up, so it did look a little bit mismatched, and things were kind of almost floating. It's something that I really don't like about it, so I may revisit this at a later episode just to touch it up and make it look a little bit different. We may remove these scaled effect glass panes altogether, but as you can see here, as we move along on the axis, you can see the shadows being cast is because it's jutting out completely. And I thought once I moved an entire piece back in it would work, but it didn't. As you can see here, we've put a little bit of vine coverage on, and I do think it looks nice, but they look a little bit unnatural against the rest of the building, so they may come out at a later date. The next thing I wanted to do was expand my scenery. So we did a little bit of terrain painting just to make it look a little bit more standout-ish, and just have this hill sequence carry on all the way around and frame the entire building. It's something that I've not liked since I put in the little cave system that went around the Taste of Africa habitat, so I did want to make it look more like one piece rather than this unnatural looking hill that had just popped up out of the ground from nowhere. And I think it does finish off the area really nicely. The next thing was to remove some of the staff pathing. This probably will change again in the future, but for now I want to just run everything along a little bit and make a nice little staff path just to tidy up our issues with the pathing. But you can see nothing sits quite right in this part of the zoo. There's something about it that doesn't quite work. Next, I wanted to put in some flora and fauna and just make this little area look a little bit more natural. So we threw down some trees, again sticking with the Africa theme of this entire biome. A lot of the reptiles that we've got in there, they're from more tropical habitats and things like that, and I think that's fair enough, but largely this is part of our Africa habitat, or Africa biome I suppose, and I wanted to make sure that that's stuck with the theme. So I sunk a lot of these grasses into the earth itself, so they just look more like three-dimensional grass, because a lot of the grass that you've got in the long grass, believe it or not, I think most of this area was already long grass and you can't see it from a distance, so I quite like having, there we go, it wasn't actually. So we put in some long grass just to make things stand out a little bit more, and when you zoom right in, you've got this really nice looking area. I thought it was missing something, so we put in some water. And again, I'm going to take out the staff path and make a nice little pond and have the staff path going over into a bridge, which we'll decorate ourselves in the next episode when we finish off this staff area. I am going to do a little bit of off-camera work just to tidy up the exhibits and the habitats and make sure that we've got everything looking good. before we move on to our next build. I don't even know what the next build's going to be, so that's going to be exciting. But we'll soon find out, I'm sure. So fairly happy with that. We've got a nice little bridge for the staff, a lovely little pond area, single tree right in the middle on a little island of its own, and then it was just a case of expanding our grasses and making it look a little bit more lived in. Here's the turtle habitat. We did a lot of changes to this one, took out that garish looking wood structure and put in a lovely little cave system for them to hide in, nice big tree in the middle, and just tidied up the entire area a little bit more. Looking a lot better now, and we may even put some wall decor in. I might actually create like a painted sunscape of some sort on one of the plaster walls. Very happy with it. We sadly said goodbye to one of our African buffalo. He died of old age during this. Again, another issue that I'm having. I'm doing so much building, I don't have enough time to actually manage the zoo, especially when I'm speeding it up a little bit just to make sure that certain effects work or paths are sitting right. Anyway, the next step was to decorate this crocodile habitat. We put in a few reeds, just sunk a few things into the ground just to make things pop out a little bit more, and then it was a case of putting in a few rocks here and there, and we'll probably do a little bit more terrain painting just to make sure that everything looks natural and not like this weird hastily put together piece of work which isn't great. But I'm really happy with how it's all turned out, and it's certainly when you compare it to how it was a couple of episodes ago when we first started out this build, it looks a lot better. So we've got a lovely sign there guiding people into the tortoise habitat, where it looks a lot more natural and habitat-like. Our crocodiles have a lovely place to bask in the sun. Need to tidy up some of those reeds a little bit. We've got this lovely entrance corridor that comes in and invites people in. I'll probably put a sign on that front entrance though. From above, it looks like a totally different building, and inside it's vibrant, it looks nice, it's inviting, it makes me want to go in and explore and see all of the wonderful animals that are in there. And that brings us to the end of this episode. Thank you guys for watching. I really hope you enjoyed this one as much as I've enjoyed building it. Make sure you give me a like, comment, and subscribe to this channel for more Planet Zoo. I'll see you next time.